The world of snitches is a murky one in the U.S. justice system. Law enforcement at both the federal and local levels have wide discretion for dealing with informants. For providing information and participating in stings, informants are granted reduced or lenient sentences, given payouts, or sometimes sent to witness protection. There are many that say using informants perverts the criminal justice process, that criminals are incentivized to lie. Results have been wide-ranging. Tips from informants have cracked notorious crime rings wide open. On the other hand, informants have lied, helping to wrongly convict or even cause death to innocent people. Here are some stories about criminals turned informants that run the gauntlet from crazy to tragic. During the first half of the 20th century, the American Mafia thrived mainly due to their code of omerta and their ability to successfully bribe various officials. Much of the secrecy came to an end when Joseph Valachi, a small-time New York gangster, spilled the beans. Over several years, Joe worked as a getaway driver, enforcer, and hitman for various criminal enterprises, including the Lucchese and Luciano crime families. In 1959, Joe went to prison for heroin trafficking. In 1962, suspecting Joe of being a rat, a fellow prisoner who was a Genovese crime boss put out a hit on him, promising a $100,000 bounty. Scared, Joe beat his alleged assassin to death with a length of pipe. But he had the wrong inmate. Still incarcerated and a sitting duck, as well as now looking at a life sentence for murder, a desperate Joe turned state's evidence. Per an agreement with the government, Joe pled guilty to a charge of second-degree manslaughter and began working with the U.S. Department of Justice. Eventually, in 1963, Joe testified before the Senate Government Operations Permanent Subcommittee and explained the structure, history, and inner workings of the Mafia. The hearings were broadcast live on TV. The Mafia was an open secret in Italian-American communities, but now, for the first time ever, the federal government and the public had irrefutable evidence that the American Mafia existed. Joe's testimony helped indict hundreds of mobsters and helped to change the culture of the Mafia, cracking the code of silence wide open. Over time, other mobsters also began flipping. For his pains, Joe was sent to a federal correctional institution, La Tuna, a low-security prison near El Paso, Texas. There, he served his sentence in an air-conditioned prison suite until he died of a heart attack in 1971. Joe definitely wasn't the only mobster to become a snitch. Salvatore "Sammy the Bull" Gravano rose to become an underboss in the Gambino crime family, and then blabbed about it. Among other illegal deeds such as extortion and fraud, Sammy was involved in 19 murders. On December 11, 1990, during a raid, FBI agents and NYPD detectives arrested Sammy, John Gotti, and Frank Lucasio, Gotti's right-hand man. Sammy was charged with racketeering, while Gotti and Frank, among other things, were charged with 5 murders, bribery, and tax evasion. Ultimately, during Gotti's trial, Sammy ended up testifying for the prosecution, implicating Gotti and many other high-ranking mafiosos. His testimony created a domino effect, and many other mobsters came forward to corroborate his words. Gotti and Lucasio were sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole and a $250,000 fine. In the end, over 35 mobsters were convicted and imprisoned, including high-ranking members of the Gambino, Colombo, Del Cavalcante, and Lucchese families. In light of his confessions and testimony on the witness stand, Sammy received a sweetheart 5-year sentence. Some claim that Sammy didn't snitch in hopes of leniency. He really just wanted to take Gotti down a few pegs. Apparently, during a pre-trial hearing, wiretaps from the FBI were played, including a section where Gotti badmouthed Sammy and he got offended. As Sammy had already served 4 years in prison during the trials, he ended up serving less than a year after being sentenced. After Sammy got out, he went to the U.S. Federal Witness Protection Program. He assumed the name Jimmy Moran and was sent to Tempe, Arizona, where he started a swimming pool installation company. Chafing under the restrictions of witness protection, less than a year later, Sammy left the program. Sammy started using his real name and began living openly. He gave interviews to the media, even consulting on a biography being written about him. But soon, Sammy fell into his old ways and started an ecstasy trafficking organization. In 2000, the drug ring was busted. Sammy and 47 other ring members were arrested on federal and state drug charges. On September 7, 2002, Sammy was sentenced in New York to 20 years in federal prison to run concurrently with a 19-year Arizona sentence. After 17 and a half years behind bars, much of it spent in solitary confinement, Sammy was released on September 18, 2017. He remains on federal parole. The actions of this next informant set off a chain of events which had long-term repercussions for the Atlanta Police Department. In November of 2006, a small-time drug dealer, Fabian Sheets, was busted by a narcotics team from the Atlanta PD. Fabian had been arrested twice before in the last 4 months for selling drugs in the same spot in a crime-ridden neighborhood in northwest Atlanta. Depending on whom you ask, his third arrest was a sham. The drugs were allegedly planted by the police. Either way, Fabian was pressured by the police to provide information. Fabian pointed out a nearby modest house on Neal Street as a place where he had purchased cocaine. Fabian wasn't officially a confidential informant and his tip was sketchy, so the police fabricated details on the affidavit to get a judge to sign off on a no-knock warrant. On the dark evening of November 21, 2006, 8 plainclothes officers from the narcotics team broke down the front door to raid the house. The lone resident, 92-year-old Catherine Johnston, was terrified and fired an old pistol her family had given her for protection. The cops fired back 39 shots, fatally wounding her. No cop was injured by Catherine, although officers sustained injuries from friendly fire. The cops handcuffed Catherine as she lay dying on the floor. They planted marijuana in the house where they could find no evidence of a drug operation. The police also got an informant, Alex White, to lie and say he had purchased cocaine at Catherine's house. Alex, who had been a confidential informant for several different law enforcement agencies on and off for years, had federal contacts. When he realized that Atlanta PD were dirtying Catherine to justify the raid, he alerted the ATF, and shortly thereafter appeared on WAGA Channel 5, Atlanta's Fox affiliate, to tell his story. With Alex's help, the tireless urging of the Johnston family, and a public concerned about unnecessary police violence during raids, investigators slowly unraveled the scheme. Ultimately, a federal probe of the Atlanta Police Department revealed a culture of corruption. Atlanta PD often lied to obtain such warrants, including falsifying affidavits. In 2009, 3 former police officers from the narcotics team went to prison for manslaughter and other charges surrounding falsification of their roles in the raid. Among other charges, new regulations were instituted in the Atlanta PD. A civilian review board was created, and Georgia State Senate voted to tighten warrant requirements. The family of Catherine Johnston successfully sued the city of Atlanta with wrongful death lawsuits and won $4.9 million. Sadly, this is not the only informant operation where authorities abused their power. During a traffic stop on February 22, 2007, Florida police busted 23-year-old college student Rachel Hoffman for 0.9 ounces of cannabis. Rachel was ordered to a court-supervised drug program. A year later, she failed a mandatory drug test, and on April 17, 2008, an anonymous tip complaining about pot-smoking neighbors led police to finding 5.328 ounces of cannabis and 4 ecstasy pills in her apartment. About a week later, Rachel graduated from Florida State University with a degree in criminal justice and psychology. Facing several years in prison, Rachel agreed to be a confidential informant and buy 1,500 ecstasy pills, 2 ounces of cocaine, and a handgun in a buy-bust operation. By all accounts, though Rachel struggled with drugs, she was not involved in a criminal or dangerous lifestyle and was ill-prepared for the sting. The operation went badly, and Rachel was killed by the suspects with the gun she was supposed to buy. Eventually, the police who oversaw the operation were found to be negligent, leading to Rachel's death. They were suspended with pay. The 2 suspects in Rachel's murder received life sentences in prison. In 2009, the state of Florida passed Rachel's Law, which provides rules in how law enforcement in Florida use informants. Rachel's family also successfully sued the city of Tallahassee with a wrongful death lawsuit and won $2.6 million. On June 7, 2011, in his Lower East Side apartment, Hector Monsegur was arrested by the FBI for trafficking stolen credit card information. However, the arrest was simply the FBI's opening gambit. What they really wanted was to interrogate Hector about his illegal online activities, as the notorious hacker Sabu, who co-founded the Black Hat computer hacking group LulzSec. Worried about his younger cousins, whom he was the legal guardian of, Hector agreed to cooperate with the FBI as they investigated various hacker groups. These groups included LulzSec, which was responsible for several audacious attacks, including hacking Fox.com and compromising user accounts from Sony Pictures. A few days after his arrest, Hector entered a guilty plea to 12 criminal charges, including multiple counts of conspiracy to engage in computer hacking. He faced up to 124 years in prison. For the next 10 months, Hector, aka Sabu, was a double agent, continuing to maintain his online persona while providing the FBI with information to aid in identifying hackers. Due to Hector's help, the FBI was able to arrest 5 hackers associated with the group Anonymous, LulzSec, and AntiSec. Tips from Hector also aided UK authorities in arresting hackers. On March 6, 2012, the FBI announced the arrests, and unnamed law enforcement officials outed Hector as an informant. Hector was immediately reviled online and in real life harassed by paparazzi. The FBI relocated him. However, in May of 2012, the FBI caught wind of a blog Hector was writing about them. Hector's bail was revoked and he was sent to the New York Metropolitan Correctional Center, where he remained for 7 months. When Hector was released, he was forbidden to use a computer. Finally, Hector was sentenced on May 27, 2014. He was given time served for his cooperation with the FBI and received 1 year of probation, with his computer usage being monitored. Once the year was up, Hector tried getting a job in cybersecurity, but initially his criminal record and notorious reputation made companies reluctant to give him a chance. Finally, he was able to find employment with a company deploying white hat hackers to test client networks. Our final tale of a snitch is about a man who unleashed a scandal that's still reverberating through the American educational system. In 2018, police raided Maury Tobin's multi-million-dollar home looking for evidence that he was the ringleader of a pump-and-dump security fraud scam that had defrauded investors of millions of dollars. Facing a maximum of 65 years in prison and a 7-figure fine in hopes of leniency, Tobin gave investigators a tip, alerting them to a crazy fraud racket that hadn't been on the authorities' radar at all. Maury told the feds that the head women's soccer coach at Yale had sought a bribe in return for getting his daughter into the Ivy League school. To help corroborate his claim, Maury ended up wearing a wire and meeting with the Yale soccer coach Rudy Meredith in a Boston hotel. During the meeting, Rudy promised that he could designate Maury's daughter as a recruit for the team in exchange for $450,000. Caught on a recording, Rudy agreed to cooperate with the feds and eventually led them to Rick Singer, a college consultant and ringleader of the admission bribery scheme. Thus began Operation Varsity Blues. In the spring of 2019, 51 people were charged in a conspiracy to illegally influence undergraduate admissions decisions at several top U.S. universities through cheating on admissions exams and faking athletic programs.